Today I'm showing you step by step how to create this 12-layer Black Forest cake. I'll walk you through my entire cake design and recipe development process for transforming the classic Black Forest cake into an Entremet cake, as well as how I created this sculptured cake design.
My name is Louise and I'm a self-taught cake artist and recipe developer. Welcome to another episode of my baking series From Classic to Iconic, where I turn classic desserts into modern Entremet cakes. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to make a modern version of one of the most classic desserts, the Black Forest cake. This is a cake that you guys requested to be a part of the series for a long time, and I do understand why, because this traditional German cake truly is a classic. With no less than 12 layers, this cake is packed with cherry, chocolate and cream flavors, and also introduces new textures with ganache, crunch and mousse. As some of you may know, I currently live in Berlin in Germany, but we will be moving to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which I'm very excited about, but of course I'm also sad to leave Berlin. So I thought this Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte also would be a nice tribute to the 4 amazing years that I've had here in Germany. I'm going to show you the process behind developing this cake recipe, my thoughts behind transforming the classic Black Forest cake into an Entremet cake, and how I managed to create a tall 12-layer Entremet cake that not only is stable, but that also tastes amazing. If you want to bake the cake, you can find the full recipe on my website via the link here and also in the description box. To make this cake, I'm also going to show you how to master the following techniques. How to make a moist chocolate cake, a crispy milk chocolate and cocoa layer, a fudgy cherry Kirschwasser ganache, a creamy mascarpone whipped ganache, a smooth cherry compote, an airy milk chocolate mousse, and a shiny mirror glaze. I'm going to show you how to make the following layers: chocolate cake, milk chocolate and cocoa crunch, cherry and Kirschwasser ganache, mascarpone whipped ganache, cherry compote, chocolate mousse and mousse domes, mirror glaze, and chocolate decoration. If you want to learn more about how to make elegant, layered and delicious Entremet cakes, you can now check out my online course, Master Entremet Cakes at Home, where I show you how to create professional quality cakes from start to finish, right from your own kitchen. Inside the course, I teach you my 5-step formula that I use for all my cakes: cake base, crunch, creamy element, mousse and decoration. You'll also learn how to make 5 of my signature Entremet cakes, different glazing techniques, discover recipe development and cake design, and also receive PDF troubleshooting guides and Excel recipe course material, giving you everything you need to start creating your own cakes at home. Okay, let's get started!
From the traditional Black Forest cake, we have 3 main flavors: cherry, chocolate and whipped cream. And for the cream layer, I wanted to make a layer with a more creamy and stable texture, and also something that has a richer flavor than the traditional whipped cream. I therefore decided to make a mascarpone whipped ganache, where I chop white chocolate and put it in a jug. I then heat heavy cream and a bit of vanilla paste almost to a boil and put over the chocolate. After 1 minute, I use an immersion hand blender to blend the ganache, add in cold heavy cream, and lastly, of course, a lot of mascarpone. I pour the cream in a bowl where it needs to set in the fridge overnight before we can use it to assemble our cake. A Black Forest cake normally contains a light chocolate sponge cake with a more dry texture, but for this cake I wanted to make a more moist chocolate cake with a deeper chocolate flavor to really contrast the cream and the cherry flavor. So I made this chocolate cake where I first mixed flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, baking powder, a bit of espresso powder and also salt. In another bowl, I'm whisking eggs, oil, sour cream, buttermilk and vanilla, and lastly add in coffee. The coffee brings out the chocolate flavor even more and also balances the sweetness of the cake. I then pour the cake into pastry rings, as we need 2 cakes, and bake them at 175 degrees fan-assisted oven for around 13 to 17 minutes. Once the cakes have cooled, I cut off the top so they are 1.5 cm tall and put the first chocolate cake in a clean pastry ring with acetate baking sheet. We'll save the other cake for later. I then put the cake in the freezer while preparing the next layer. To elevate the traditional cake, I decided to add a bit of crunch, because as you know, I don't make any cakes without a little of crunch. So I make a crunch layer with milk chocolate and cocoa, where I melt chocolate and mix in feuilletine, Nutella, cocoa powder and salt. I spread half of the crunch on top of the chocolate cake, level the layer and put the cake back in the freezer where it needs to set before I can add the next layer. We'll save the rest of the crunch for later. Now it's time to add the first cherry layer, a cherry ganache to add a fudgy texture to the cake. To resemble the flavors from the traditional Black Forest cake, I also decided to make the ganache with a twist of Kirschwasser, a cherry brandy from fermented sour cherries. To make the ganache, I start out by melting white chocolate, then I heat heavy cream and cherry puree almost to a boil before pouring it over the white chocolate. I then add Kirschwasser, stir again before lastly hand blending the ganache. The ganache is poured onto the set crunch layer before putting the cake back in the freezer where the ganache needs to set. As cherry is our main flavor in this Black Forest cake, I wanted to make a layer that would really bring out the purest cherry flavor. So I decided to make a cherry compote. To make it, I heat cherry puree to the boiling point before adding sugar and pectin. The mixture needs to cook until the puree is very thick, almost sticking to the whisker, before I take it off the heat and mixing in a bit of soaked gelatin to make sure that the compote isn't too fluid. Lastly, I stir in lots of Morello cherries in the compote. I put it to the side where it needs to cool a bit while we start assembling the cake. We have now prepared all our cake elements and are therefore ready to assemble the cake. First, we need to finish the mascarpone with ganache, where I whisk 2/3 of it to soft peaks before I put it in a piping bag. We'll whip up the rest later on when decorating the cake. I then spread a 1.5 cm layer of whipped ganache on top of the cake. Level the surface and put the cake back in the freezer where it needs to set for around 20 minutes. The secret to getting a clean cake cut for this cake is really to make sure that the surface of the layer is set before adding the next layer. After the whipped ganache is set, I add half of the cherry compote, level the surface and put the cake back in the freezer for approximately 10 minutes. We can now start the second phase of assembling the cake by adding the second chocolate cake. Again, putting the cake back in the freezer for around 10 minutes before adding the remaining chocolate crunch. I make sure to level all layers in between to get a sharp and clean cake cut. After the crunch has set for around 15 minutes, I pipe a last layer of mascarpone with ganache on top of the cake, level the surface before putting the cake back in the freezer. 20 minutes later, we can now add the final cake insert, the cherry compote. After leveling this layer, the cake needs to freeze fully overnight. To add a last chocolate element to the cake with an airy texture, I'm making a milk chocolate mousse. I here start out by melting milk chocolate and pouring it in a bowl. I then heat heavy cream almost to a boil, whisk in soaked gelatin, and pour the hot cream over the chocolate while stirring in the middle with a spatula. After it's cooled off, I whip heavy cream to a lightly whipped foam and fold it into the chocolate mixture. We then put the mousse in a silicone mold and let it set for a bit because the frozen cake otherwise will sink to the bottom due to the liquid consistency of the mousse. After it's set a bit, I put the frozen cake down in the chocolate mousse with the cherry compote facing downwards. Then I make several chocolate mousse domes in different sizes that will go on top of the cake. Then the cake needs to freeze fully overnight. Since this is a Black Forest cake and I wanted the visual look and appeal of this cake to display that as well, I decided to make a chocolate glaze. I make this by soaking gelatin, heating sugar, water, heavy cream and glucose syrup almost to a boil before pouring it over milk chocolate. Once it's mixed, I add a bit of black coloring paste to give the cake a more Black Forest vibe. Then the glaze needs to cool to 34 to 35 degrees. I place the fully frozen cake on a baking cooling rack and pour the 34 to 35 degrees hot glaze over the cake. Due to the temperature differences, the glaze will stick and cover the cake with a beautiful shiny surface. With all the layers we have inside this cake is honestly the tallest Entremet cake I've ever created. I therefore wanted to make sure that the cake still would have a balanced design. I also wanted the look to resemble the classic Black Forest cake with chocolate, cream and fresh cherries. So I decided to make a cake design with white chocolate ribbons and a chocolate spiral made of dark chocolate. After placing the whitest chocolate ribbon, the more narrow ribbon and also the chocolate spiral on top of the cake, I whipped the remaining mascarpone with ganache to sour peaks and put it in a piping bag with a large star tip. I then released the frozen mousse domes of the molds, we need 4 in total, where I cut off the bottom of 2 of the domes, so in the end I have 4 mousse domes in different sizes from large to small. I pipe a layer of whipped ganache around the 4 mousse domes and gently place them on top of the cake inside the spiral with a small palette knife. And finally, I finish the cake with the main element of this classic cake, fresh cherries. And here we have the final Black Forest cake that I really think takes the traditional cake from classic to iconic. This cake has so much definition, so many amazing layers and textures, and I love how the cake design resembles the classic Black Forest with chocolate, cream and fresh cherries.
So good! I really wanted this cake to be a mix of cherry, chocolate and cream, as that is what a traditional Black Forest cake is about, and I really think this is the perfect mix. Here also is some added texture with the crunch, with the ganache, also added a bit of Kirschwasser to keep it the traditional way, and we also have some mousse, and I really think this takes the classic to the next level. So all in all, taking this from classic to iconic. I hope you get the chance to make this amazing Black Forest cake at home, and if you like my videos, make sure to subscribe. You can also check out my Entremet cake playlist here. See you in the next video!